Libraries and Archives Online, A New Hope, presented by Hannah Lee. Hannah Lee is a double alumni of UCLA, obtaining her BA in English in 2011 and MLIS in 2013. As the Discovery and Systems Librarian for California State University, Dominguez Hills, she collaborates with other library staff and faculty to develop policies, procedures, and workflows that enhance access and discoverability of the library's collections, web service integrations, and support of the curation of the library's digital content. Some of her interests include copyright, intellectual property, cybernetics, book arts, mentoring, and volunteering for nonprofit organizations. All right, Hannah, take it away.
Thank you. Just make sure that you can hear me okay.
Sound good.
Awesome. Okay, so welcome. It is still the morning for me, so good afternoon for all of you. So this presentation, it's a little bit unusual because first I started during the pandemic, so I had yet to meet during the time of this project most of my colleagues, which made things a little bit difficult. And the problem the archives presented to me was multifold. They had this collection of university archives or university catalogs that sat in the archives, but it really didn't belong in the library or the archives. And it didn't really belong online in archive space, which is where archives typically hold their materials, or in the library catalog. But during the pandemic, we had these files that needed to be accessible. And they were very, 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 very large files. So some files went way over 50 megabytes. Some went up to, I think the biggest one was about 80 megabytes. And so we had a set of problems for this specific collection that was a little bit unusual and outside the scope of most things. And this presentation is also for anyone who really likes Pantone Color of the Year 2022, which is lilac. So what was the problem? The main problem was that the university was in lockdown, as was most of the Cal State universities here in California. But the faculty and staff, they still needed access to these materials, especially when they were formulating courses for the next semester or beyond. And as I said before, these materials, they were only available in print, which is unfortunate because, as I've said, we were in lockdown. So most people can't get access to the archives anyway, but the pandemic made this a lot more difficult. So I approached this problem that was presented to me as a big issue sort of thing. So we're starting from these print records, print resources. Things need to happen so that they need to be available online for faculty and staff to use in their planning. And I went through this with the archivist who was in charge of this program to figure out the limitations, the space and the file size being one of the biggest tests or limitations, and then finding the best solution I can for the user group. And, getting feedback, making sure that all the bits are in the right places, all the information is what the users actually need. And afterwards, I can pat myself on the back if this is successful. So I started with the archivist because, much like a reference interview, that's where you want to start with the person who was charged with the project in the first place. And the background of it, as I mentioned before, is that this was mostly in print and it needed to be online. The urgency of this was, again, sooner rather than later. And this is in academic terms, not in public or normal people terms. So this meant a matter of a few months, but I gave it I could do it in a few weeks. I might have been optimistic, but that's the timeline I gave. So limitations. What were some of the limitations? It didn't really belong in archives. It didn't really belong in libraries because of the size of the materials. We couldn't use our native Alma to upload files. There was a big restriction in the type of files that we could upload. It really didn't belong in archives because it weren't archival materials, but they were still housed with archives as an archival reference. So we were looking at other technologies that were available to us, things that we didn't need to go out and buy, things that we've already had, and okay, let's figure out what are the pros and cons of all of these tools. So from that initial interview with the archivist, we formulated, okay, here are some possibilities. Here are some pluses and minuses of each possibility. So this collection needed to be under the purview of archives because that's where it was previously, that's where it kind of should be, but it still needed to be available through the library catalog in terms of discoverability, so that there's one place that, or a couple of places that people can go for searching and not just where it lives. And so what we decided on was that, well, I'll get to that in a bit. But like I said, the biggest limitation was the size of the files. The files we used could not have been used for in our OPAC or ILS, which is ALMA, because it was too big. It didn't fit within the scope of archive space, which is the archives platform that we use. We have campus technology like Box or Dropbox. I think we have Dropbox, but I always found the limitations of those type of services is that they can change. They easily change. When I started out as an undergrad at UCLA, at first we didn't have anything, and then we had Google Drive, and then we also had Dropbox, but then we moved into Box. Things can change a lot. The best option I thought at the time would have been the platform that we use for our website, which is called CM1, but it's also really clunky to use. It really wasn't meant for a university setting. And then we also have access to libapps. Same issue, we can't upload very large files, but it could be used as a sort of a searchable interface as well. And so during this sort of drafting stage, one of the things I made sure to do was check in with our archivist, Tom Philo, who is very, very nice, very awesome. If you ever get a chance to come over to CSUDH, tell him I said hi. Is so that we could check in with one another through email. Okay, this is what I'm going to do. This is when I'm going to do it by. Let me just check with you during that time. And if you have any questions, we can figure it out. We also needed to make sure that all of our stakeholders were aware of this function or this service we were offering at this time. And notify the affected departments, not only external to the library, but internal to the library as well. Let's say, for example, there was someone in reference for the archives and they didn't know about this project, then they couldn't let others know, or other potential questions that come up in their reference services or reference times that, hey, this is a thing that's happening, please be on the lookout for it, rather than just saying, no, we don't have this. I also created a draft to make sure that, okay, this is what I'm working on, this is the live document. So let's make sure that we go through this incrementally. And then at the very end, making sure that all of these, all of the discoverability places are linked together to this single resource. And I'm just going to open up chat just really quickly because, yeah, Pantone color of the year. Okay, and so after this should say live and die by UI UX, not LVE. Feedback is one of the most important things you can get as a person living on the internet. Even though you might think something is great, someone else might see, okay, this has an issue with either readability, this might have an issue with discoverability or accessibility, something. So feedback is very, very important. And we adjusted how things look based on the feedback. We test things again and again and again. One of the reasons I have a Mac instead of a PC for work is because I typically use PCs at home, so I could double check and make sure things look correctly both on PC and Mac, as well as mobile design. And before getting that final check by whoever your supervisor is, by the dean of the library, by academic senate, or whoever those governing bodies are, make sure that everything is accessible Make sure everything is publicly available so you don't have to go through proxies. And then finally, after you're sure and you've had multiple people check and make sure that your work is solid, then you go ahead and publicize. So what does this look like? So the university catalog, where it lives currently, is in the Archive Special Collections group as a LibGuide. And initially, what had happened was these catalogs, I thought they were going to be a one and done. Okay, it's going to be simple. We get the type, so campus catalog versus general session versus class schedules versus extended education. We also had a nursing program as well. We just put them in by dates, right? Well, as I found out throughout this entire process, there are some dates missing. There are some entire semesters missing. There are also special editions, like in this nursing section, there is a Bachelor of Science in Nursing catalog that is completely separate. So we had to adjust and make sure that we had multiple options to see, okay, how do we format this in order to make this the best fit? We also wanted to highlight some of these covers because, one, these covers are really cool. And two, it just gives you sort of a spotlight look at the way that sort of graphic design has changed throughout the years. And I thought this was a really important way, not only in terms of publicizing this collection through social media and through listservs and emails, but also for a way for non-staff and faculty to get really interested in this collection, in this digital collection, particularly the arts program, because I've seen walking through the hallways now that I'm finally allowed back inside, the way that they represent themselves creatively. I see a lot of the similarities here through the library or the campus covers, but also minor details like this. So initially, when I had this as a LibGuide, this about the university libraries collection, there was a link for it up here, but that was kind of redundant. So my dean asked me, hey, can we get rid of this little link that links it to the top of the catalog, because we can just click on this, that links it to the top of the catalog anyway. That required a little bit of CSS JavaScript coding in the back end. And so let me see. And after this, what I was saying about earlier about making sure that things are linked is that if you go into our library website, the main page, and type in CSUDH catalog, one of the first things that pops out is one, yes, a database, but also we make it so that this research guide is discoverable when you type in CSUDH catalog or a lot of variations thereof. One of the difficulties of using Primo VE, which is where our sort of interface for our discoverability happens, is that this is very word specific. So if I type in CSUDH catalog versus CSUDH catalogs, that usually shows up different results. So you can see that first result is missing, but I have this second result because I made sure to include those very specific words, kind of like the words that you put in quotation marks, as well as variations like CSU catalog or California State Dominguez Hills catalog. It was a lot of variations thereof. And at the end of the day, it looks like this project went off pretty well. As you could see, the metrics are really good. We started out in, I believe it was September that this question was posed to me. And then we got it in publicized in early October. So as you can see, we've already had a lot of views, which is really great for me. I haven't seen these metrics in a while, so this is good to see that people are using this resource. And my final thoughts and takeaways for this is everyone's situation is going to be unique. It's, even though me putting the actual files inside the website platform that we use was the right fit for us, it might not be the right fit for you. You might use like Box or another external file storing platform. but also don't hesitate to ask for help. Tom, who is the archivist that brought me this project in the first place, he was instrumental in making sure that I understood what was happening, why things were happening the way they were, and any other little questions that I had. And also, don't let the imposter syndrome set in, because this was my first this was at the end of my first year. And so, like I said, I hadn't met a lot of my colleagues in person yet. I was still a little bit unsure of the environment, like where everything was, what the culture is, because we were all living online. But I work with a great bunch of people. I cannot be happier with them because they are so supportive and so nice, which is rare in higher academia for a lot of institutions. And they were just really supportive in making sure that I could be the best person that I could be, personally and professionally. So with that, I'm going to open this up for Q&A. Here are some suggestions if you're confused, if you're a little bit iffy about what kind of questions you can possibly ask, as well as my contact information. If you have any questions at all, either on this or any other sort of UI UX design questions, or about Alma, about LibGuide, I am here for you.
Thank you very much, Hannah, and great idea to share some suggestions there. I like that a lot. And we'll definitely be sharing all the slide decks with the contact info and stuff. I see 3 questions in our Q&A right now. And if any of you folks out there have more, feel free to add them. The first one is, hi, Hannah, can you explain the advice to keep the draft plan private and not sharing it widely?
Sure. Hi, Christina. Christina is one of my colleagues from CSUN, I believe it is. Can you explain the advice to keep the draft plan? So initially, the draft plan was to keep it private so that we didn't have too many voices or too many cooks in the kitchen, so that we could just focus on, okay, this is the draft that we're going to set forth, instead of, okay, we have this potential and then this potential and then this potential sort of interface that we can use, because people are going to drift towards whatever they prefer. So we wanted to keep that initial draft sort of a secret, not really secret, because anyone with administrative privileges in LibGuide could see it, but not a lot of people just go into LibGuides and, mull around like I would tend to do. So that was the advice behind keeping the draft plan private, and also so that someone doesn't come across it randomly. So let's say there was a student or faculty who randomly found this draft of the university catalogs and they couldn't find it again. And then they went on to LibChat and said, hey, I found this thing at one point, but I don't see it now. Where is it? By keeping things private, you don't get it into those sorts of questions, and you make sure that whatever is workshopped stays workshopped instead of as a sort of potential final project or product.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Where did you finally store your files?
So we finally store them in CM1, which is the website platform that we use for CSUDH. It is wonky, to say the least. But essentially, it's a content management system that's large enough to handle the files. I have some editing privileges because I also handle bits of the website. But essentially what it is I upload the files onto this platform. I get the URL and I just link it from that LibGuide. Fortunately, it does hold those larger files, but it does take a little bit of time. So there was a lot of downtime. Let's just say that.
Okay. How are you marketing this to students and your institution community?
Great question. This is less so for students, although if students come across it, that's great. And it is part of our University Archives Digital Collections area, or University Archives collection, so it is searchable in that manner. It was marketed towards the institution directly through email and through Academic Senate, I believe, and other faculty bodies who would best make use of this resource. So this was done directly via email because still during pandemic, so we can't drop into people's offices as much as I'd like to.
All right. Our next question is, do you have any evidence that users outside the original target audience used this resource? For instance, the art department.
Great question, Megan. Not yet, mostly because I got caught up in other things, but we have used it in our library social media. And I believe, depending on the metrics, I should be able to pull. Although last time I saw, we aren't able to pull a lot of metrics from Facebook because of some backend redesign, but that's a story for another time. I would love to be able to liaison with our subject librarian for the arts and humanities on this, but we'll have to see until probably fall semester of 2022 because the CSUs have this bigger project that I need to get my tuchus on.
All right, thank you. I'm not seeing any more questions in the Q&A, though it looks like a lot of people in the comments really appreciated your presentation. If anyone does have any more questions in that Q&A, feel free to throw them in there. We still have a few more minutes left, so we can hang out for a minute. Again, all these presentations will be shared, both the slides and the recordings after today in the next couple of weeks. So keep your eyes on your inbox. Oh, we do have a question. Did you harvest other websites to your Primo site?
Yes, that was yes. Yes. For the long and the short of it, I think our institution is a little bit different from other CSUs, not only in terms of how we've set up our search function, but also how we integrate things. So we don't, when you search for a LibGuide or a topic like on a LibGuide, we don't have them as records in Primo. What we do is we have them as suggested databases or suggested LibGuides, because they did talking with the librarians, other reference librarians, we didn't feel like that would be the best avenue just yet. And also they didn't have a discovery and systems person for about 2 or 3 years before I came along. So that's an issue that we'll have to revisit.
All right, I see one more question. So how long did this all take?
If I were to condense it all, it might have taken a week-ish of work, but given other priorities and other meetings and such, it took maybe about 3 weeks-ish. And that's not typical, apparently, so don't use me as a measuring stick. Although, if you do need help, please, again, feel free to reach out to me and I can help you with however way I can.
All right, thank you. Another question. Did you need additional funding, and how did you achieve that funding if you did?
I did not need additional funding. One of the great things about coming from private institutions is that we look for ways to not use money as much as we can. So I made sure to use as much of the resource that we already had. And to follow up with the next question, the only major cost would have been digitizing the catalogs, but archives already, I believe they already had someone to digitize items anyway. They just pushed the catalogs up the queue a little bit.
Okay, does anyone have any additional questions? Well, I'm not seeing any, so I'd just like to thank you again, Hannah, for that presentation. It was really, really great. And to all the attendees, all of this will be shared post-conference. So thank you.